Imagine someone confidently saying, "God does not exist," and that statement is true. At first, nothing seems unusual. This is a familiar claim in modern culture. It appears in books, debates, comment sections, podcasts, and classrooms. But pause for a moment. What does it mean to say something is true? Not meaningful. Not emotionally satisfying. Not useful. True. The moment anyone, atheist or believer, makes a claim about reality, they are no longer just expressing a preference. They are making a statement that they believe corresponds to how the world actually is. And here is the quiet paradox this video explores. Atheism cannot meaningfully argue against God without assuming objective truth. Yet grounding objective truth is far more difficult inside atheism than many realize. This is not an attack. It is not a sermon. It is not a trick. It is a philosophical tension, one that even many atheist philosophers openly acknowledge. Part 1. What atheist arguments are really claiming. Modern atheist arguments often sound like this. There is no good evidence for God. The God hypothesis is unnecessary. Religion is false. God is a psychological or cultural invention. Science has replaced God. Notice something important. These are not merely statements of taste or personal meaning. They are truth claims. When an atheist argues that God does not exist, they are not usually saying, "I personally choose not to believe in God." They are saying, "God does not exist, and this is objectively the case." That distinction matters. Because the entire force of an argument depends on whether it is binding, whether it applies to others regardless of belief, culture, or emotional state. If atheism is merely subjective, then debates about God are pointless. But most atheists reject that conclusion, and rightly so. They insist that their position is rational, evidence-based, and true. Which brings us to the first hidden assumption. Part 2, the assumption of objective truth. Objective truth means some statements are true regardless of what anyone thinks. Reality is not created by belief. Logic is not optional. Contradictions are false even if everyone accepts them. Examples. The universe exists. Contradictions cannot both be true at the same time. If a conclusion follows from true premises, it should be accepted. Every atheist argument depends on these principles. Without them, arguments against God collapse into personal narratives. If truth is subjective, then God does not exist is no more compelling than God exists. Debate ends. So atheism must assume objective truth exists. Human reason can access it. Logic reliably tracks reality. These assumptions are not scientific findings. They are philosophical foundations. And this is where the tension begins. Part 3. Can atheism ground objective truth? Atheism, broadly speaking, holds that reality is fundamentally material. The universe is impersonal. Minds arise from matter. Reason is a product of physical processes. There is no overarching purpose or design. Given this framework, a critical question emerges. Why should truth exist at all? Not meaning. Not usefulness. But truth, correspondence between thought and reality. From a purely naturalistic standpoint, thoughts are brain states. Brain states are caused by chemistry and physics. Physics does not care about truth. It only cares about causal interactions. So where does truth come from? Part 4, Evolution and the Problem of Truth. A common response is, evolution explains why our minds track reality. But this explanation is weaker than it first appears. Natural selection selects for survival, not truth. A belief only needs to be useful, not accurate. Consider this. If believing that a rustling bush contains a predator helps you survive, even when it doesn't, that belief will be favored by evolution. False beliefs can be adaptive. Evolution does not care whether your worldview is true, only whether it keeps you alive long enough to reproduce. This creates a problem. If our cognitive faculties are shaped entirely by unguided survival pressures, then why trust them when doing abstract metaphysics? Why trust logic beyond practical contexts? Why assume our deepest beliefs correspond to reality rather than convenience? Atheism needs reason to be truth tracking. Evolution only guarantees survival tracking. That gap is not trivial. Part 5. Logic as a mystery inside materialism. Logic is not a physical object. You cannot weigh it. You cannot measure it. You cannot locate it in space. Yet logic is universal, necessary, and binding. The law of non-contradiction applies everywhere, including places humans have never been. Even atheists assume logical laws cannot be violated. Rational conclusions should be accepted. Contradictions are false regardless of opinion. But inside a purely material universe, why should abstract logical laws exist? Why should matter obey them? Why should human minds be obligated to follow them? Materialism describes what happens, not what must be true. Logic deals in necessity, not causation. This creates another tension. Part 6. Truth versus utility. Atheism often collapses truth into function. Beliefs are tools. Ideas evolve. Truth is what works. But if truth is merely usefulness, then a comforting illusion is as valid as a harsh reality. Power determines belief. There is no obligation to accept inconvenient conclusions. Yet atheists do not live this way. They insist that some beliefs are false even if comforting. Some conclusions must be accepted even if unpleasant. Evidence matters even when it threatens identity. That insistence quietly reintroduces objective truth. Truth that transcends utility. Truth that demands assent. But where does that demand come from? Part 7. Why this is not a God of the gaps argument. This argument does not say science can't explain truth, therefore God exists. That would be a mistake. Instead, it says atheism uses concepts it cannot easily justify. This is about foundations, not gaps. It does not prove God. It exposes a tension. A worldview that relies on truth must explain why truth exists. Ignoring that question does not make it disappear. Part 8. Theism as a coherent explanation. Theism does not automatically solve every problem. But it does offer a coherent account of why. Reality is intelligible. Reason matters. Truth is not accidental. Logic reflects something fundamental. If reality originates in a rational source, then truth is not an illusion. Reason is not a fluke. Logic is not arbitrary. Human minds are capable of knowing reality. Truth is not invented. It is discovered. This does not force belief. But it explains why belief in truth makes sense. Part 9. What atheism must quietly assume. To argue against God, atheism must assume objective truth exists. Reason tracks reality. Logic is binding. Evidence matters universally. These assumptions are not neutral. They carry metaphysical weight. They point beyond mere matter. And that is the paradox. Part 10. Why this matters for modern culture. We live in an age of might truth, relativism, epistemic fragmentation, distrust of reason. Atheism often positions itself as a defender of reason. But reason itself requires grounding. Without it, science becomes opinion. Debate becomes power. Truth becomes narrative. Atheism wants the fruits of rationality, without always addressing its roots. Conclusion: the quiet question. So here is the question this video leaves open. If atheism is true, why should truth exist at all? Not meaning. Not morality. Not beauty. Truth. The thing atheism needs most, yet struggles to explain. Perhaps the most interesting discovery is not that atheism is wrong, but that it may be standing on something older than it admits. Something it cannot easily replace. Something quietly assumed every time someone says, God does not exist, and that is true.